In this video from ITFreeTraining, I will look at how to install Windows Server Core 2012 R2 and configure it for remote administration. Server Core is Windows Server without the full graphical interface and is the default and preferred choice for Windows Server. Once Server Core is configured, you should find that the majority of configuration, if not all, can be done from remote. I will change to an empty VMware virtual machine to start the install of Server Core 2012 R2 on. To start the install, I will start up my virtual machine with the Windows Server 2012 R2 DVD in the optical drive. Once booted from the DVD, the first screen of the setup wizard will ask which language you want to use for the install, the currency format, time format, and keyboard type. In this case, I will accept the defaults and move on. On the next screen, you have the option to repair the computer. If you have an existing install that is failing to boot, this option may help resolve the booting problems. Once I press Install Now, on the next screen I will be asked to enter in a product key. The product key determines which edition of Windows Server 2012 R2 will be installed. Assuming that edition is present on the DVD, once the product key is entered, the install will be able to continue to the next screen, where you can select which operating system you want to install. In this case, I have the choice of installing the standard edition of Windows Server 2012 R2, either the Server Core or the full GUI install. By default, Windows Server 2012 R2 will default to the Server Core install. Microsoft has done a lot of work to make it so that the majority of server administration can be performed from remote. For this reason, once the initial configuration of the server has been completed, there should be little need for the administrator to visit that server again. The vast majority of administration should be able to be performed from remote. It is no wonder that this is why Server Core is the default option. Once I select the Server Core option and move on the next screen I need to accept the license agreement. Once I tick the option I accept the license terms, I can move on. On the next screen, I have two options for the install. The top option will perform an upgrade. This option will not work unless setup was run from the operating system. In this case, since I'm not performing an upgrade, I will need to select the second option for a custom install. On the next screen, you can decide how the drive that you are going to install on will be partitioned. If you have unallocated space, like I do, setup will automatically partition this space as required. If your drive does not appear, you may need to select the Load Driver option to load additional device drivers. If you are booting from a SAN, for example, you may need to do this. In this case, I will not create any of my own partitions, so I will press Next and move on. The install will now start. The process does take a while to complete, so I will pause the video and return shortly. Once the setup has finished copying files, it will reboot. During the startup process, Windows will detect device drivers and also perform some performance tests on the server. This takes a few minutes, but I've sped up the process. Once complete, I will next be asked to enter in a password for the administrator. Once this is entered, I will be able to log in to the new install of Windows Server. Now that the install has completed, it needs to be configured. Since this install is on a virtual VMware machine, the next step is to install the VMware tools. These tools will improve performance of the virtual machine. In this case, until the tools are installed, the virtual machine will not have a network card installed. To do this, I will insert the VMware Tools disk from the menu and press OK to install the package. To start the install, I will change to the D drive, which is the DVD drive, and run setup. Notice that even though Server Core has no GUI interface, it still supports some basic graphical windows. For the install, I will accept all the defaults. The install takes a minute or so to complete, but I've sped up the process. Once complete, I will be asked to restart the computer. Once the computer has restarted, the new device drivers will be installed, including a device driver for the network adapter. Once the computer has restarted and I have logged back in, I will once again be taken to the command prompt. Before I can configure the server from remote, I first need to configure some basic settings like computer name and network settings. To do this, I will run the command sconfig. Sconfig is an easy way to configure basic settings on the server. First of all, I will configure the computer name by selecting the second option. For the computer name, I will enter in NYDC2. In the Active Directory course, I will look at promoting this server to a domain controller. This change requires a restart. At this time, I will press No, and I will restart the server later on. You can see under the fourth option, Remote Management is configured on this server by default. The next option, 5, is the Windows Update settings. By default, updates are not being applied to the server. To ensure that this occurs, I will change this option to Automatic. Once the setting is changed, a message dialog will appear informing me that the system will check for updates every day at 3 a.m. The next option I will select is 7 for Remote Desktop. It should be pointed out that when I enable this option, Remote Desktop will be available. However, when using Remote Desktop, you will have the same interface that I have now. Remote Desktop does not allow graphical intensive applications to be run. Once enabled, I will be asked if I want a connection running network level authentication or a less secure method. This essentially means that the computer connection to the server using Remote Desktop needs to be running Windows Vista and above. Once selected, an information dialog will appear to tell you what setting has been selected. The network option I will select is 8, which will configure the network settings. When the option is selected, notice that the index of the network card is shown. In order to configure the correct network card, the network index needs to be entered in. Once entered in, the next menu will ask what you want to configure. In this case, I will enter in 1 to configure the IP address of the server. Next, I will need to enter in S for static IP address and enter in the IP4 address that this server will use. Once the IP address is entered, the next option will ask what the subnet mask is that it will use. In this case, the subnet mask of 255.255.255.0 is the default, and this is correct for this network. Next, I need to enter in the gateway address of the network. Once entered, I will be returned back to the previous submenu. On this menu, I will select 2 for the DNS server and enter in the DNS server address. In this case, it will be the IP address of NYDC1. Next, I will be asked for an alternative DNS server, but I will leave this blank. That is it for network connection, so I will press 4 to return to the previous menu. I have now completed all the configurations that I want to make using sconfig. I will now enter in 13 to restart the server. Restarting is required as the computer name has changed. The restart is not required for the network changes. In a moment, I will also add the computer to the domain. This was possible before the restart, but if you are changing the name of the server, I personally like to restart the computer first. It is possible for the computer to be registered using the old name if you do it in one step. Once the computer has restarted, I will log back in again. Sconfig is a good configuration tool. However, not all settings can be configured. The most noticeable missing configuration is the ability to configure IP6, so I will do that now using the command prompt. The command line utility that I will run is netsh. This command line utility is used to configure settings on network adapters. The first command I need to run is netsh interface, followed by the interface, which in this case is IP6. All the rest of the commands that I will run start with netsh interface IP6. In this case, I will end the command with show interface. This command does not perform any configuration, but it does tell us an important piece of information. This tells us the network index for the network adapters in the system. In this case, the network adapter I am interested in is the Ethernet adapter with the index of 12. This index number will be used in the next set of commands. The next command that I will run will configure the IP6 address. The command starts the same, but then adds set address. Following this is the interface command than equals, followed by the interface number of 12. This is the interface number that was obtained in the last command. Lastly, I need to specify address equals and the IP6 address that I want to use. The next command configures the locally configured DNS server. This is done with the command add command followed by DNS servers. After this, the interface number 12 is added followed by the address of the DNS server. Since there can be multiple DNS servers configured, the last part of the command is index equals 1. This tells NetSH to configure the first DNS server. If I wanted to configure a second or third DNS server, I would just need to change this index as required. The last command that I will run will configure the default gateway used. This will use the add command again, but this time uses the command route. Essentially, this command adds an additional route to the local routing table. For the default gateway, the address used is : followed by /0. This is basically saying any traffic not for the local network should use this route. This is essentially what a default gateway does. Once again, I need to add the interface number followed by the IP address of where I want to route the traffic. That's it for the network configuration. I will run the command sconfig once again, as I want to add this computer to the domain. To add the computer to the domain, I want to select the first option and, when prompted, press D to select domain. All I need to do then is enter in the domain name and a user with the ability to add computers to the domain and enter in the password for this user. When I do this, I will get a prompt asking if I want to change the computer name. I've already changed the computer name, so I do not need to change it again. Once I am prompted, I will restart the computer. To be on the safe side, I like to separate this into 2 steps to make sure everything is registered correctly. Otherwise, the computer name may end up being different from what is registered in Active Directory. Once the computer is restarted, I can log in. Notice that when I enter in administrator, the computer will attempt to log in locally. To ensure that I log in using the administrator account in the domain, I will need to enter in the username followed by the domain name. Before I have a look at how to configure Server Core from remote, I will first show you how to open a new command prompt if you close it. Once it is closed, there is no Start menu to get it back. To get it back, press Ctrl-Alt-Delete. From this screen, select the option for Task Manager. From Task Manager, select the option at the bottom, More Details, to show the menu. From the menu, select the File menu and select Run New Task. Enter in CMD and press OK, and the command prompt is back. To start configuring Server Core, I will open Server Manager from the Quick Launch. If I select All Servers, notice that the newly installed server is not present. To add it, I need to right-click All Servers and select Add Servers. From the Add Servers screen, if I press Find Now, I can find the server from the list and add it. Once the server is added, it will appear in the list and Server Manager will contact it and perform a health check. If I right-click the server, notice that there are options I can select, like Add Roles and Features and Restart the Server. Below this, there are a number of different options. These will change depending on what roles are installed on the server. It may appear that you have full control of the install, but look what happens when I select Computer Management. Server Manager displays an error indicating that the appropriate firewall rules have not been created on the remote server. The first rule that it states needs to be enabled is COM plus network access. However, this is incorrect. As we will see in a moment, the rule that needs to be enabled is Windows Management Instrumentation. Below this is the rule for Remote Event Log Management, which is correct. so a total of 2 groups of rules need to be enabled in order to allow computer management to be used with ServerCore. To do this, I will run PowerShell, which I can do by right-clicking the server and selecting PowerShell. Notice that when I run PowerShell, the start of the line indicates that PowerShell is running on NYDC2. To configure the appropriate firewall rules, I will use the netsh command. The parameters for this command are advfirewall, which stands for Advanced Firewall, so the command will make changes using the Advanced Firewall. The Advanced Firewall can also be used to make other changes, so the next keyword that is used is Firewall, which indicates that the changes being made are the actual firewall settings. Following this is Set Rule, indicating that a rule will be changed. Following this is Group, indicating that the changes are to a group of rules. In this case, the group of rules will be Windows Management Instrumentation. Following this is the keyword New, which indicates that a new value is to be set, followed by Enable equals True to indicate that this group's firewall rules will be enabled. Now that the group of rules has been enabled, I will press the Up key to get the last command back and then run the command again, but this time for the rule group Remote Event Log Management. Once both sets of firewall group rules have been enabled, I can exit out of PowerShell. Notice that I need to enter in exit twice. Essentially what has happened is PowerShell has been run on the local computer, and then that instance of PowerShell has created a second PowerShell instance on the remote server. If I go back into Server Manager, notice that when I run Computer Management for the second time, this time Computer Management will run. Computer Management appears to run fine. As you can see, I can select the different items and they display correctly. Notice, however, that when I select Disk Management, I get a warning message telling me that the firewall has blocked disk management from working. It is important to note that depending on what you are attempting to manage on ServerCore, you may need to enable additional rules. Shown here are the firewall rules that need to be configured for particular admin tools or features. Not all admin tools require firewall rules to be configured. If you are finding that you are having problems with a particular tool, it may require a firewall rule to be configured. This concludes configuring ServerCore for the exam objectives, but there is one last piece of software that I want to look at that is not an exam objective, but is a useful tool to use with ServerCore. I will now go back to my Windows 8 computer to download it. To download the software, I will close all these windows and open up Internet Explorer. Once open, I will then perform a Google search for Core Configurator 2012. At the time this video was created, there was no version of Core Configurator for 2012 R2. However, the version of 2012 seems to work. At the top of the web page is a link for downloads. If you are not able to find this web page, I have left a link for it in the description of this video. Once the web page opens, it is just a matter of selecting the version that you want to download. In this particular case, I will download the ISO version. Since I am running ServerCore on a virtual machine, the ISO format is a good choice for this. You also have the option to download a zip file. The download itself is not too big, just under 2 megabytes. Once the download is complete, I will change back to my ServerCore install. I have already mounted the ISO that I just downloaded to the optic drive of this virtual machine. Once I change to the D drive, I can run the script start config. This is a Windows script file, but you will notice that it is able to display a graphical interface. If I select the option for Computer Settings, notice that I have the option to change the computer name and add it to the domain. There is also the option to add or remove roles and access the services running on the server. Notice the option to promote the server to a domain controller is grayed out. In Windows Server 2008, this is supported. However, it is currently not available in Windows Server 2012. At the bottom of the screen, there is also functionality to configure Remote Desktop and WinRM. If I go back to the original screen, the next option down is Network Settings. In here, you can configure the network settings, group membership, proxy configuration, and iSCSI configuration. Unfortunately, core configuration does not support the configuration of IP6, so that will still need to be done from the command prompt. If I go back to the previous screen, there is an option for licensing. The next option that I will look at is the option for Control Panel. In here there are some Control Panel options, not all of them, but when you consider the server does not have a full graphical interface, these options are the most common ones that you are likely to use. If I go up to the Tools menu, I have the option to open a command prompt, Task Manager, Registry Editor, or System Information. All this software can be run from the command prompt. This software makes it simpler to launch in some respects. This concludes how to install, configure, and perform remote administration on Windows Server Core 2012 R2. I hope you've enjoyed this video from ITFreeTraining, and I hope to see you in other videos from us. Thanks, and see you next time.